During a gripping live TV exchange, Samuel L. Jackson boldly challenged President Ibrahim Traoré with a question that stunned the audience. But it was Traoré's calm, profound reply that left Samuel speechless and changed his perspective forever. The unforgettable moment is now inspiring millions around the world. From him, Ibrahim Traoré, President of the Transition of Burkina Faso, millions of viewers around the world watched live as Samuel leaned closer to his mic and fired the question that made the entire audience gasp. Mr. President, do you even understand what it means to lead, or are you just pretending? For a second, you could hear a pin drop. A few staff members exchanged shocked glances. Traoré didn't flinch. He didn't even blink. Instead, he looked Samuel in the eye, calm, collected, and said, "Nothing." Samuel frowned, clearly expecting a defensive outburst. But all Traoré did was fold his hands on the table, his silence louder than any shout could have been. The air felt heavy as everyone waited for him to speak, and then quietly but firmly, he replied, "Do you?" Gasps rippled through the crowd. In that instant, something in the room shifted, and millions leaned in closer to their screens, holding their breath. For a moment, Samuel just stared at him. It wasn't the reply he expected. Traoré's voice had been soft, but his question cut. Deep do, Samuel's usual bravado faltered. He opened his mouth to speak, but no words came out. Finally, he managed to laugh, awkward, nervous, and said, "I'm not the one running a whole country, man." Traoré's lips curved into the faintest of smiles. "But you run lives, don't you? Every word you speak shapes how people see the world. Every movie, every interview, you guide them. You influence how they treat one another. That's leadership, too." So he paused. "Do you understand what it means?" Samuel froze. The audience sat in silence, watching him wrestle with the question. Behind the cameras, producers whispered to each other. One even wiped her eyes, though she didn't know why. Because somehow, Traoré's words weren't just for Samuel. They were for everyone watching. And in that quiet, something began to stir in Samuel's heart, something he hadn't felt in years. Samuel leaned back in his chair, visibly shaken. For the first time on live TV, he didn't have a comeback. His mind drifted back to a memory he'd buried for decades. He saw his grandmother's face, weathered, tired, yet kind. He remembered her sitting him down as a boy and saying, "Samuel, true strength is knowing the weight of your words." He hadn't thought of that in years, not since he became Samuel L. Jackson, the actor, the celebrity, the tough guy everyone expected him to be. But here was this young African president speaking those same truths his grandmother had tried to teach him. He looked across the table at Traoré, who just sat there patiently, his eyes steady and kind. Something inside Samuel cracked. For the first time in a long time, he didn't feel like an actor playing a part. He felt human, and as the cameras kept rolling, he lowered his head slightly. The great Samuel L. Jackson was at a loss for words, and viewers all over the world couldn't stop watching. Then another, and another. Soon the entire audience erupted into applause, breaking the tense quiet that had hung in the air since Traoré's calm question. Samuel looked around, stunned. He had come ready to provoke, to prove a point, but instead, he found himself feeling small. Across from him, Traoré simply gave a polite nod, as though he hadn't noticed the applause at all. In his throat, he swallowed hard, hearing his own grandmother's voice again in his mind. "When a man makes you question yourself, son, listen. That's where growth begins." For the first time in his long career, Samuel felt vulnerable. The cameras kept rolling. The world was watching, and yet all he could do was stare into the eyes of the young leader in front of him and feel a strange, unfamiliar respect forming. The applause died down, and then Samuel, voice quieter now, leaned forward. "All right then," he said almost hesitantly. "What does leadership mean to you, Mr. President, since you seemed to understand it so well?" The words weren't a challenge. Anymore, they were something else. "Leadership," he began, "isn't about power." He paused, looking down briefly as though the weight of his own words pained him. "Leadership is when your people are hungry and you cannot eat, when they are scared and you cannot sleep. When you carry not just your own pain, but theirs too." He lifted his gaze back to Samuel, and the audience could see the glint of unshed tears in his eyes. "That's what leadership is," he finished, his voice breaking slightly. His own heart felt heavy, and his throat burned. For the first time in a long time, he understood. The audience sat frozen, many holding back tears. Samuel turned his face slightly away, his jaw tight. And yet here, Trop was showing more grace, more humanity, than he himself had in decades. True didn't gloat. He didn't smile triumphantly. One of the producers motioned for the next segment to begin, but no one dared interrupt. Not now. Finally, Samuel raised his eyes. The voice was soft. "I didn't know you carried all that," he said. And just like that, Samuel felt something break inside him, because he realized that the toughest man in the room wasn't him. It never had been. And for the first time in his life, he was ready to listen. Samuel sat up straighter, searching for something, anything to regain his footing. He couldn't just sit there silent in front of millions of viewers. So he leaned in, his voice steady, but his eyes betraying uncertainty. "All right, Mr. President," Samuel said slowly. "Tell me this. If you care so much about your people, why? Do so many of them still suffer? Why haven't you fixed it yet?" The question hung in the air like a blade. Even the producers behind the camera exchanged nervous glances. Trop didn't flinch. "That breaks my heart every day." But fixing a broken nation isn't like fixing a broken chair. It takes time, sacrifice, and sometimes more pain before the healing can begin. His voice softened. "I may not see the harvest in my lifetime, but I'm planting seeds because I believe our children deserve to eat from a better tree." Samuel froze, and for the first time, his tough facade began to crack. The camera zoomed in on Samuel's face. Traoré leaned back in his chair, his eyes distant now, as though speaking to someone who wasn't even there. I asked him why he kept working if nothing changed. The studio was silent. Traoré's voice caught for just a moment. He told me, "Because someday it will change for you, for your children, and for theirs. That's what it means to be a man." He paused, swallowing hard before looking back at Samuel, and when he died, he left me nothing but that lesson, because I know someone has to stand in the mud so others can walk on solid ground. A single tear rolled down Samuel's cheek before he could stop it. He wiped it quickly, but everyone watching saw. The world was beginning to see too, even the harshest. Critics on the panel sat quietly now, unable or unwilling. To break the spell Trot had cast, Samuel cleared his throat, but his next words were softer, almost reverent. "I didn't expect to hear that tonight," he admitted. "I didn't expect to feel this either." Traoré nodded kindly, offering no gloat, no judgment, just a quiet understanding. "None of us expected," he said gently. "Not until we remember that behind every statistic is a beating heart." The words landed heavy. Samuel pressed his palms together, staring at the floor, overcome by emotions he couldn't name. Viewers at home were already flooding social media. Clips of Tro's words spread like wildfire. People called it the moment that made us believe. Again, in the studio, however, no one dared move. No one wanted to break the fragile, beautiful silence that had wrapped around them. And in that stillness, Samuel finally looked up and smiled faintly. Something inside him had begun to change. The lights in the studio dimmed slightly during the break, but the tension still lingered. When they returned to air, Samuel leaned forward, his voice low but firm. "You said you endure hatred and lies, but what about your own peace, your own family? Don't you deserve a life too?" The words hung heavy. It wasn't just a question, it was almost a plea. Traoré exhaled slowly. His eyes glimmered with something deep, something no camera could quite capture. "I've already had my life," he replied softly. "I've known love, I've known hunger, I've known laughter under the stars. But when you see your people cry for help and you stay silent, you lose something no family can fix. You lose yourself." A hush fell over the room again. Samuel's fingers gripped the edge of his chair. Viewers around the world felt it too. The raw weight of those words. On social media, people started calling him the man who speaks to your soul. And in that moment, Samuel realized Traoré wasn't just answering him, he was answering everyone who'd ever been afraid to stand up. The next question came slowly, and it was barely audible. "What's the hardest part of being you?" Samuel finally asked. Traoré paused. He didn't smile this time. His jaw tightened slightly, and he looked away for the first time that night. "The hardest part," he began, "is knowing the people you're trying to save may never forgive you for how you save them." He turned back toward Samuel, his voice breaking slightly. "They call you a dictator, a rebel, a failure, but you carry on, because you know one day they'll see you not as a man who stood in their way, but as the man who laid himself down so they could walk forward." And then something unexpected happened. Samuel wiped his cheek and realized it was wet. He tried to laugh it off, but the cameras caught it. A tear. The man known for his toughness. His fire sat there, moved beyond words. The audience was still. Viewers at home were crying openly. Even the cameramen blinked away tears. In that studio, everyone felt what Samuel felt: humility and hope. For the first time, Samuel leaned back, his shoulders slumped. It was as if the fight in him had simply dissolved. He looked at Trey with something different in his eyes now. Not defiance, not skepticism, but quiet respect. "I thought I came here to challenge you," Samuel admitted, his voice cracking. "But you've shown me more about myself than I ever expected." Tro gave a faint smile. "That's what we all need sometimes," he said gently. "Someone to remind us who we really are." The audience erupted, not in applause, but in silence. That rare sacred silence that said more than clapping ever could. Social media feeds flooded with clips of that exact line. Someone to remind us who we really are. And for Samuel, it was the beginning of something new. In that moment, he wasn't just an actor or a celebrity anymore. He was a man stripped bare before another man who stood taller, not because of his power, but because of his heart. And across the world, millions of people began to see Ibrahim Traoré for what he truly was: a leader of souls. The cameras kept rolling as Samuel finally gathered himself, but the tone of the interview had shifted completely, and everyone watching could feel it. Samuel leaned in and asked quietly, "Doesn't it ever get too heavy, carrying a whole nation?" "On your shoulders?" Trey's lips tightened. His gaze drifted off for a second, and then he nodded. "Every single day," he said softly, "it's a weight that crushes your chest. You see mothers burying their children. You see men break under hunger and fear, and you know you can't save them all." His voice cracked just slightly and his eyes glistened. "But I carry it anyway," he added, sitting up straighter, "because if I don't, who will?" For the first time all night, the audience broke into quiet applause, hesitant, almost reverent. Samuel swallowed hard. His hands trembled slightly as he set down his question cards, and across the world, social media erupted again. People posted his words with one hashtag: "If I don't, who will?" It wasn't just a phrase anymore. It was a call to action. By now, the interview felt more like a therapy session. Samuel took a deep breath before speaking again. "You know," he began, his voice low, "I thought I was here to expose you, but now I feel exposed." Trey tilted his head, curious. "I've spent my life playing tough guys," Samuel continued. "On Kryn, off-screen, I thought I understood strength, but what you have, it's something else. It's love disguised as courage." Trey's eyes softened. "That's the only kind of courage that lasts," he said simply. Samuel sat back, and for a long moment he couldn't speak. He just stared at Trey, seeing him not as a politician, not as a stranger, but as a man who'd somehow cracked open his soul. The camera zoomed in as a tear ran down Samuel's cheek. "Thank you," he whispered, and millions watching at home felt something shift inside them too. As the final segment of the live show approached, the studio lights brightened. The host started to wrap up, but the audience wasn't ready to let go. One by one, people began standing. It started with an elderly woman in the front row, then a young man, then the whole studio. A standing ovation, not for a Hollywood legend, but for a humble leader from Burkina Faso who spoke his truth without anger, without ego. Samuel stood too, clapping along, his face wet with tears. Trey, visibly moved, stood and placed a hand over his heart. "I am not better than any of you," he said to the audience, "but I promise I will never stop trying to be worthy of this." The cameras panned across the crowd, people crying, smiling, holding hands. And across the world, viewers typed comment after comment. "He made me believe in humanity again. The world needs more men like Traoré. I can't stop crying. Thank you." That night, Hope felt possible again. The studio was already brimming with raw emotion. Samuel, still visibly shaken yet deeply respectful, took one last glance at his notes. He cleared his throat. "There's one more question I have to ask you," he said, "and forgive me if it sounds harsh." Traoré nodded calmly. "Ask." Samuel leaned forward, his voice low but sharp. "How do you sleep at night knowing you can't save them all?" The words cut like glass. The studio gasped. Even Samuel looked surprised at his own bluntness. Trop didn't flinch. Instead, he closed his eyes for a moment, then opened them and said, "I sleep knowing that I tried, that I didn't turn my back on them, that I didn't let fear make me a coward." He paused and smiled faintly. "And even if I fail, they know I stood with them till the end." Felt sacred. Samuel sat back, speechless. For the first time all evening, he couldn't find a single word to say. The live broadcast ended, but no one moved. The audience remained standing, many wiping away tears. Samuel reached over and shook Trey's hand firmly, holding it longer than he'd meant to. "You've changed me tonight," Samuel whispered. "I'll never forget this." Traoré gave him a warm, steady look. "That is all any of us can hope for," he replied. "To leave someone better than we found them." Behind them, studio staff wept quietly. Even the cameraman was wiping his eyes. The internet was already ablaze. Hashtags trending. Millions of shares. People writing about how this single interview made them rethink what it means to lead. It means to care. Outside the studio, people had already gathered in the street, some holding Burkinab flags, others just standing silently in solidarity. That night, the world felt just a little lighter because one man refused to give in to hate or despair. 3 days later, the clip had been watched over 300 million times. People everywhere, young and old, spoke of Traoré's words. "I stood with them till the end." On the flight home, Samuel posted on social media, "I went to question a leader. Instead, I met a teacher. Thank you, President Traoré. You showed me what real courage looks like." The comment section overflowed with stories of viewers who felt transformed, who cried watching the exchange, who promised to stand up for others in their own small ways. Ibrahim Traoré quietly and humbly returned to his work. But the world would never forget what he had said that night. In every heart that watched, a seed of hope had been planted. And as the credits rolled, the final image of Traoré's calm smile lingered on screen, a reminder that one man's love for his people can touch the entire world. Dear viewers, if this story moved you, if it made you cry or inspired you even just a little, please like this video, subscribe to our channel, and comment below what part touched your heart the most. Your support helps keep stories like this alive and heard. Let's share this message of hope together.